Afternoon. So, what I thought I'd do is just grab a handful of CDs from one of the sections of my collection. They're in alphabetical order. So this is just a handful from J. It's obviously not all the J's I have, but I think I've said before that I organize just by first word. So, for example, Jimi Hendrix, I I categorize him in the J section as opposed to the H section, which I know in most, or formerly in most stores, music stores, they would do by surname, but I don't for whatever reason. So yeah, I just grabbed a handful and I thought I'd go through. These are all secondhand. I'll try to remember what I can about where I got them, how much they were, and talk about a little bit about each one. So the first one here you can see is a Jam compilation, the Jam. This compilation is called Beat Surrender, which is obviously was the name of one of their songs. This came out in 1993, and this came out on the label Carousel. Carousel, obviously Carousel is it's with a K in the Carousel. Carousel. Um, this is a strange compilation. It's basically a greatest hits. You can see there, Beat Surrender, Town Called Malice, Pretty Green, It's Entertainment. Um, some of their bigger hits. Uh, but the recordings sound, I can't say this for all songs because to be honest, I'm not that familiar with the Jam. The Jam are one of those bands that I've never got. So many I'll put them in the same class. I'm not saying musically or anything else, but as the Clash. The Clash and the Jam are two bands that so many people revere and reference as huge influences and in their group of favorite bands. But both those bands I've just never, no matter how many times I've listened to them, I've never got it. As I've just they just sound like average throwaway bands to me. And the Clash have got, I get some memorable songs, and I guess they get played on the radio so much. Songs like London Calling and Rock the Casbah that you can't help but kind of feel that they are kind of I don't know, it's memorable songs. But they always come across as boring to me. One night I put on Sandinista, which is their three disc album. I don't know if there was three CDs, but certainly when it's a long album and it's kind of a bit different. And I found some of that stuff a little bit interesting. It's kind of more on the dub area. I can't even. It was a few years ago when I listened to it, but still, yeah, never been able to get into them. But I'd say it's similar to about the Jam. I know so many people love the Jam and talk about Paul Weller as kind of one of his generation's greatest songwriters, but it doesn't do it for me. Not to say I dislike the music, but it's just kind of like it's like mid card, I guess, if you're putting it into the terms of a boxing a boxing show. The song I do like of theirs, my favorite song is "That's Entertainment." But I was going to say, before I got sidetracked, is some of these songs sound like their alternative recordings. They don't sound like the recordings I've heard and I'm familiar with. Like "That's Entertainment." The the version or recording I'm familiar with is much brighter. The guitar is a lot brighter. The sound, I mean, and also Paul Weller's vocal has got more aggression, especially when he gets to kind of the end of the chorus. He goes, what are those lines? Like, thinking about your holiday, that part, thinking about your holiday, and he kind of like really spits it in the version I'm familiar with. But in this one, it sounds a lot more lower energy, and the guitar sounds duller. Yeah. So I don't know if it's one of those because I know they were on Polygram. I think was their label, and this has been put out by Car Russell. So it's kind of one of those. What am I trying to say? one of those compilations where they take the songs, they get the licenses, but they can't put out the original recordings. They got to put out alternative recordings or re-records or something like that. I don't know if that is the case with this. You can see here they're all under Polygram Music. Well, there's a few on the EMI as well, isn't there? But this, has been licensed. So for whatever reason, this cost me 50 cents. I got it probably about a year and a half ago. I haven't played it a whole lot. To be honest, it's kind of one of those things that I might actually get rid of eventually because, the condition is fine. Anyway, so that's one J CD that I've got there. Next one is something probably a lot of people are very, very familiar with. It's a compilation that you see around a lot, and you have seen around a lot for probably like the last 30 years. When did it come out? 92 came out, so 31 years ago it was released. I'd say it's probably his most famous compilation, The Ultimate Experience. Was there another one that came out a little bit later in the 90s? It had a slightly different cover. I think I've owned before as well. But as you would imagine, this has kind of got all the most famous. I got this for $1, and this was about 3 years ago. I was pretty happy to pick this up because I've owned various Hendrix albums over the years and compilations. Like I said, either this one or something very similar to this. This has got all his most famous singles, songs. You can see there Along the Watchtower, Purple Haze, Hey Joe, When Cries Mary, so on and so forth. It's got 2 live tracks on the end, Star Spangled Banner, which I think the version he did at Woodstock in 1969, and Wild Thing. I like Jimi Hendrix as much as the next person. And there are some people who absolutely, see him as this kind of like a divine figure. I guess guitar players in particular. I went through a stage where I really was kind of obsessed with his stuff, say about in the early 2000s. But then also went through a period where I didn't listen to him for a long time, but he's kind of one of those artists that is at the point kind of he's in the classic rock category, so you just hear him even without intending to. Just you turn on the radio during the day, you're kind of you're likely to hear a Hendrix song one time or another, or used in movies or TV shows or ads, other things like that. I remember in the 1990s they used Voodoo Child for a rugby league ad in New Zealand. I think it was Lion Red, which is a beer company. Or was it DB? Well, which beer supports rugby? Okay, whatever. But I remember that would have been the early 90s, and that so whenever I hear that song, I kind of associate it with that ad. But it's it's a good compilation. If you want just a good overview of Jimi Hendrix's career, I think it's probably going to do that pretty well. Sold a few million albums around the world. It went number 1 in New Zealand. Jeez. Wonder why it went so high here. I was looking through the track listing just before I started this video, and I always love that song, Little Wing. Little Wing, that's a pretty famous song. Isn't it? Would you hear that on the radio? Probably. I remember I have a memory of drinking in a bar when I was living in Tokyo in Japan. And see, that's the thing about living in some countries. In New Zealand, it's so goddamn expensive to do anything. Certainly to go out drinking, it's freaking expensive. But just going out and drinking in a bar, just not getting absolutely fucking hammered, but having a couple of beers was a lot more common in Japan because it's a lot more cost effective. It's just not very expensive. I remember there was a jukebox, and I remember someone put on Little Wing in the bar. And when you're drinking, I don't actually drink that much. I've never really drunk that much. I've never been a big drinker. I've drunk alcohol since I was a teenager, like most people. But I've never been an absolute, other than a few times in my youth, or kind of once every now and then. But anyway, when you drink, and there's like a perfect equilibrium where it's just enough to make you feel perfectly relaxed and like everything's all right in the world. And if it's too little, you kind of don't have enough of a buzz. But then at the same time, if you go a little bit further, you start kind of or at least I do, I start feeling bloated, or especially with beer, you start getting very bloated, and or just kind of you're chasing, you know what I mean? You kind of get that really good feeling, and then you keep drinking because you're trying to maintain that, and then you just get fucking sloppy drunk, or worse. So it's like kind of like 2 3/4 beers is like, for me, is like the perfect equilibrium. And I was like right at a stage, and I just had like a couple of beers, and someone put Little Wing on the jukebox, and it was like everything was perfect for the world for the length of that song, for the whatever 4 minutes that song continues for. It's a lovely song anyway. It's like a beautiful song, really like smooth. Anyway, what's next? Janet Jackson. This is another. Geez, all the things I'm showing are compilations, but a lot of what you buy secondhand, I've said before, are compilations. This I got for 50 cents. The condition of this isn't great, I remember. And I remember the first time I tried to play it, it actually had a bit of trouble getting started, but I kind of cleaned it up, kind of, wiped it with a cloth. It's still a little bit. And it's been fine since then. You can see there the teeth are half gone, which is always a problem. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest Janet Jackson fan. This is 86 to 96. So obviously she's continued to work after 96. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest Janet Jackson fan, but with a lot of these things, there's often just like one song that I really like, and I'll just get a compilation for that reason, Can you guess what the song is on this? I'll tell you. It's song number 1, Runaway. I think she recorded that specially for this compilation. Might actually check that. I think I've read that before that's true. Yes, that's correct. So she released 2 new tracks, Runaway and 24 Play, were both recorded specially to be included on the Greatest Hits collection. I also noticed that there's a different CD cover in different countries. So the other one, I'll show it on this. It's that one there. This one is, I think it's a better cover, as in I think it's kind of more simple. I can't look at her without just seeing Michael Jackson. So I first time I heard that song, I loved it. It captures perfectly a particular kind of female pop music. I've talked about this a lot in a lot of videos. I know if you've watched, which probably you haven't, but if you have watched, I've gone through talking about other female pop stars. Like I did one on Jennifer Page and Martika, and I've talked about Madonna and Belinda Carlisle, and not so much about Susanna Vega. I wouldn't really call her as a female pop. She's kind of in a class of her own. But there's a particular kind of song. I can't even describe it. That just, even by artists that usually I don't like Janet Jackson, but there's a particular song that I love, and this is one of those songs. And you don't hear them anymore. They're not really written anymore. They were kind of written, I think, in a period between the late 80s through to the mid 90s. Anyway, very upbeat, happy sounding song. I like the video as well. I liked it at the time when I was younger. I've actually seen it probably about 30 years, or however long, 25 years. The rest of the songs are obviously just stuff that she recorded throughout her late 80s and early 90s kind of heyday. Rhythm Nation, that was big, wasn't it? So there's quite a lot of liner notes in there. I wonder who wrote those. I wonder who wrote it, because usually they get someone kind of relatively famous to do the... David Ritz, okay, a biographer, or a biographer. I thought they'd get someone more famous, like Quincy Jones or her brother or something like that. Anyway, yeah. So a Janet Jackson compilation, which I bought basically to listen to one song. And I would probably struggle to keep the CD on to listen to the rest of it. Because like I said, I'm not really a big R&B, especially modern R&B fan. I actually usually prefer, if I'm going to listen to something, I would prefer just more kind of straight pop. Do you recognize that? Well, that's not helping either because it's in Japanese. All right, this is Justice. If you can see that, the katakana. What the fuck is it? Justice. And the name of the album is Cross. It doesn't have a name, it's a symbol. Justice, if you don't know, are a French, what would you call them? I guess that kind of, I've talked before when I talked about Daft Punk and Cassius, that kind of French house, maybe, French kind of disco, French electronic music that was particularly big in the late 90s through mid 2000s. Yeah, the class here, it says French house, electro house, electronic rock, electro clash, new disco, alternative dance. From 2003 through to the present. It's funny, I was talking to one of my co-workers, this was probably about 5 years ago, and we were talking about, I think he said, what are you listening to? I said I was listening to Daft Punk. No, I said I was listening to, yeah, Daft Punk. Because then he said, oh, Daft Punk, they're just a rip-off of Justice. He was kind of saying it tongue-in-cheek. And I was like, I think it's the other way around, buddy. 2003 they started. Surely Daft Punk had already released Homework and Discovery by that time. I don't really think you can call Daft Punk the rip-off there. But Justice, you could say, are a rip-off of Daft Punk. I wouldn't say that. They do sound similar though, but they're both in that French house electronic type, genre. So I expect some crossover. But this is a good album. This is a really good album. I got this obviously secondhand in Japan when I was traveling there, 2019, I think. And I downloaded this probably about 10 years prior, and I really liked it. And so I was always on the lookout to get a copy of it because, like I said, if I really like an album, I always try to get a physical copy of it. And I was pretty happy to find this. I think I got this for probably about 300 or 400 yen, which is about 3 or 4 New Zealand dollars, I guess 2-ish American dollars, which is a pretty good deal because I've said before, when you buy secondhand CDs in Japan, they're always in very, very good condition, near new condition. It's a really solid album, but if I had to choose songs I really like D-A-N-C-E, Dance, which has kind of got this, almost sounds like a kid's vocal, like it sounds like from a kid's TV show. I'm not sure if it actually is. I also like Phantom. It's a really good song, but the whole album, like I said, it's a really solid album. It's something that you can definitely put on from start to finish without skipping. If you like electronic music, particularly that kind of French house, then I recommend this album. Here's the Japanese liner notes. Anything different in there? No, it's just a... There's the lyrics to D-A-N-C-E. D-A-N-C-E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's another J. we've had The Jam, we've had Jimi Hendrix and Janet Jackson, we've had Justice, and finally, you can probably see the one that's behind Justice is John Martyn. Now, I can't remember if I showed this when I bought this. I think I bought this earlier this year. This was $1. And when I bought this, I knew nothing about it. And I'd still say I'm pretty clueless as to anything about it. I know that he is, well, he was because he's passed away now, but a kind of folkish musician. I listened through to this once or twice, and it didn't really make any impression on me. However, I've heard a lot of people, again, reference this, talk about it in glowing terms. So it's something that I'm probably going to give it, more of a go-to and listen to again. And a lot of times, I don't get things on the first turn, and sometimes, it got really. I think when I was looking, I first saw this. Like I said, I'd never heard of the name John Martyn before, but I Googled it, and it got kind of 5-star ratings across the board. And it's kind of considered a classic album by many people. But yeah, he's a British folk musician in the kind of I don't know. They say folk rock, folk jazz, folk psychedelia. I was thinking more of kind of Nick Drake sounding folk, but I think Nick Drake might be more kind of traditional folk or folky folk. What I can say is that when I was reading the Phil Collins biography, which I did in the last video, he mentioned John Martyn. I think he produced one of John Martyn's albums. I don't think it was this one. No, it wasn't. This one would have been too early for that. I think it was one of the later ones in, was it Grace and Danger? I'm trying to see if it says in here. Glorious Fool in 81. It was produced by Phil Collins. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that they were kind of friends. He talked about him as a friend, and so yeah, he asked Phil Collins to produce it, and he obliged. So yeah, there's just a kind of random selection taken from part of an alphabetical shelf on my collection. All secondhand, $1. I said what, $3 or $4, 50 cents. I think that was $1.50, and quite a range of stuff. What kind of rock music? I don't know. What do they class the Jam as? They say they're like neo mods, but neo mod's not really a genre, is it? Rock, mod revival, new wave, punk, rock, power pop. Jimi Hendrix, what? Rock, R&B, pop, electronic, house, folk. All right, thank you for watching. Happy weekend.